Hey, it's Joel Markowitz and Antonia Dodge, your personality hacker. This is our second video in a short series we're doing around typology. We are, in a few days, going to open up enrollment for our profiler training certification course. We do this once a year. We open up enrollment. We've got a new class that starts every year. And it's an exciting group of people that really want to learn how to profile others and figure out personality type through either active profiling session, which is sitting across from somebody in a formal setting and asking questions about how their mind works and helping them determine their personality type, all the way to passively doing it just in conversation, casually, talking to people, determining what their type is. And we've got a webinar coming up. Before we launch into some stuff we want to talk about today, we've got a webinar coming up this coming Wednesday, I think. It's Wednesday the 6th, yes. This coming Wednesday the 6th at 7:30, we'd love for you to join us, where we're going to actually reverse engineer the 4-letter code in your personality and teach you how to figure out what's called technically your cognitive function stack. So be able to reverse engineer your 4-letter code and figure out how your mind is learning information and how your mind is making decisions using the cognitive functions in the Myers-Briggs system. So that sounds like super heady stuff. We'll break it all down in the webinar. There's a link right below this video that you can register for that. We'd love to see you there live Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So this video, we want to talk about your work life, your business life, and your career. We all spend a lot of time as people in our career experience with coworkers, with our bosses, with people that are under us in our employment, whatever. We've got to associate with people in the business world all the time, and it takes up a huge chunk of our lives. So in this video, we want to talk about some strategies and ideas on how to look at the company culture you're a part of. If you could almost give your company culture a personality type, if you could type your company culture, how would that look? What are the ways that the decisions are being made? What's the ethos? What's the tone, the energy of your company culture or your workplace environment that you have to go to every day? This can be powerful for you as you have to show up there every day to be able to navigate that space, kind of having an idea of what that culture looks like.
Yeah, and if you feel like you don't fit into it, it's good to understand why that culture is something that you might be kind of struggling with, or maybe your company culture has a blind spot to it, or your team has a blind spot to it that you don't even know because it's a blind spot. And understanding a little bit about typology can help shine a light on some of those dark places. So in the last video, we talked about introversion and extroversion and that dichotomy. And we mentioned that the dichotomies, or the 4-letter code, are so much more helpful when you go down a layer and actually look at the cognitive functions, which that 4-letter code is attempting to point you toward. It's almost like a decoder ring for what those mental processes are. Now, cognitive functions are the 8 mental processes that all of us use all the time, but depending upon your personality type, you favor a handful of them. You favor one is what's called your dominant, and another one that's called your auxiliary process, and together they make a power duo. And then you have another couple of functions that also influence you, but we're mostly going to stick with the 8 functions and the ones that have a tendency to influence certain types more than the others. So of these 8 processes, 4 of them are technically called judging functions, and those help you determine the value of something. They're where we get all of our should statements about how the world should be working, because there are evaluative criteria or decision-making processes. And the other 4 are called perceiving functions, and those are more about taking in information and what we have a tendency to pay attention to, what catches our fancy, and what lights us up when we're trying to figure out how the world works. But we're going to stick mostly with the judging processes right now as it applies to business, because businesses are made up of a lot of decision making and a lot of should statements. And it's also the way that people have a tendency to craft their teams and their businesses as they're determining what kind of company they want to be and going forth. So we're going to stick with those 4 judging processes. Now, 2 of them are called feeling processes. Their technical names are extroverted feeling and introverted feeling. And 2 of them are thinking, extroverted thinking and introverted thinking. Now, interestingly enough, there are extroverted thinking companies. Now, those are the ones that are probably the most famous, most popular sort of stereotype for business is extroverted thinking, because extroverted thinking is all about getting things done. achieving goals, setting up projects, making things happen, rallying groups and teams to make big things happen, and looking at the bottom line, looking at metrics to try to determine whether or not something was a pass-fail. So those are sort of the more stereotypical styles of businesses. But there's also the other three styles of business and teams within businesses.
Yeah.
So there's extroverted feeling teams and extroverted feeling businesses. And these are the ones that are more focused on getting needs met. They're more like service industry companies. They're the ones that focus on how people are experiencing their customer service. They're the ones who focus on keeping morale up in the company. And so they're more based on human need as opposed to the bottom line, like extroverted thinking would be.
Yeah.
There's also introverted feeling companies, which are more sort of heart-based. They're more based on the value system of the company. A lot of nonprofits fall under this category of introverted feeling, and they're based more on how people experience the world in general, not just their service, but also trying to make people's subjective experience better. And they have a tendency to focus on certain elements of quality. A lot of people in the entertainment industry are introverted feeling because art oftentimes comes from this form of expression in introverted feeling. And then there's introverted thinking companies, and that's more, I would almost want to call it digital. It's very data heavy. You'll see a lot of these styles of companies in the tech industry because introverted thinking is more based on information and data and providing really precision, basically precision, I hate to use the word widgets, but like sort of precision tools and more of a mechanic's mind. And so you've got all these different styles of companies and businesses, but even within the companies, you have individual teams. And teams themselves, which usually we as individuals are more connected with, is the team that we're part of within the company. Now, if the company's small, the whole company's a team. But if you work for a big company, it's usually your team that you're more locked in on. So the overall company might have a sort of a magnetism towards one of those four decision-making or judging styles, but then within your team itself, it may be a different one that it's going towards. So self-diagnosing what your judging process is, and then diagnosing the judging process of your team members and the sort of the personality type of the overarching team and the business can give you a lot of ahas about your relationship to your job, to your company, to your team, and maybe some of the blind spots that the team has that it doesn't even know it has.
Now, obviously, for the sake of this video, we're going to grossly oversimplify everything we're talking about, just to give you a sense of kind of how we're thinking about this. So it's not that this is the gospel truth. I think we wrote some notes down about each one of those judging functions, and then maybe a business that would be an example of that. And we'll talk a little bit about it. Obviously, the businesses we're going to talk about are way more nuanced, way more complex than boiling it down to it's this kind of business with this kind of a cognitive function or this kind of a personality to the entire business. Obviously, it's way more complex than that. But just for the sake of this video, just for the sake of your mind to start getting a sense of what this might look like so you can start seeing some distinctions, we're going to talk about it as if we're in a vacuum and it is oversimplified, just for the sake of this video. So just realize that we understand and you understand, we're all in agreement here. The business is way more complicated than being able to boil it down to this. But this just gives you a way to start the conversation, to start thinking about this in these terms.
Like an access point.
Yeah, like an access point. It's it's like whenever the Karate Kid was learning how to do karate, it was wax on, wax off. He simplified it down to very basic moves, and then complexity is built from there. We're kind of doing that with this in the conversation. So, and we could talk about this and then talk about some of the pros and cons of a business that operates this way. So just boiling it down. So let's talk about that first cognitive function. We talked about extroverted thinking. The nickname or the shorthand for that sometimes is written with a capital T and a lowercase e. Extroverted thinking. Again, it's all about what works. We've nicknamed it effectiveness here at Personality Hacker. And this is all about the end result, getting something done, setting up complex systems in a way that makes it broadly, basically accessible to the lowest common denominator. This is what effectiveness or extroverted thinking does really well. Setting up systems that in most cases can work. In other words, they're not dependent on humans making them work as much as they are. The system is the solution. If you ever hear somebody say the system is the solution, it's a very extroverted thinking way of setting up a business or a structure of something. So a great example of this that we think exemplifies this system setup is McDonald's. Whether your personal feelings about McDonald's put those aside for a second and just think about how McDonald's is set up in a very effective way. Extroverted thinking set at McDonald's to where to work at McDonald's and to be able to operate your job at McDonald's, you don't even have to read in most cases. They've created systems to be so plug and play, so ubiquitous, so streamlined, transcending culture and language and all these things. You literally have to look on like images to know the size of drink, for example, that you're going to fill up. Is it medium, small, or large? You just push the button with the symbol on it. You don't have to read large, small, or medium whenever you're doing that. So they've really simplified a system. And if you notice, one thing about McDonald's that they advertise, if you ever look at a McDonald's sign, at least here in the United States, I'm not sure overseas if this is the case, but it talks about how many billions of people they've served. So not only is there a system set up that's designed in a way that can be operated by basically teenagers, or anybody for that matter, that can work at McDonald's and interplay with the system and operate the system of serving food to people. Now the quality suffered, in my opinion, because of this. It's consistent quality, but it's not necessarily high quality. And again, that's that system. You go to a McDonald's in most places, you're gonna have the same type of food, regardless of where you are in the country or in the world. It's gonna be produced in the same way. I don't believe the quality is high, but the quality is consistent. And this is a very extroverted thinking or effectiveness way of looking at it. If you look on the thing when they're advertising, on their sign, it actually says billions and billions served. Why would they advertise about how many people they're serving? What is it that McDonald's after there? Why is that something that's important to them? Because they're highlighting and showcasing what is the product that McDonald's is actually selling, which is a very replicable franchise system. In other words, McDonald's is showcasing the system itself by saying, we've set up a system that's so robust, it's so plug and play, it's so ubiquitous, it's so elegantly constructed that we've been able to serve billions of people with this system. And that's what they are literally advertising on their sign. It doesn't say hot, fresh hamburgers or hot, fresh food. It talks about how many people they've served, because that is the thing that they are most proud of, is the system that was set up at the McDonald's corporation, basically, for their franchises to use.
Yeah, exactly. And so the franchise indicates that the system is highly, like you mentioned, replicable. And so that's a focal point that extroverted thinking is going, like an extroverted thinking business is going to really be plugged into. Now, there are blind spots to a system like this, or to a way of
pros and cons.
The pros and cons. And you keep mentioning the con, which is like the quality might not be there. So what is the human experience of going to McDonald's? It's not exactly like the most luxurious experience, and the food may or may not be ethical, right? Like there's a lot of questions around whether or not it's ethical, but you can't deny that the system is highly replicable and that their franchises are set up super fast and very efficient. So that's one of the advantages to an extroverted thinking style business, and one of the disadvantages or blind spots to an extroverted thinking style business. And if you are a part of a team that is primarily extroverted thinking oriented, you're probably going to have a lot of metrics and measurements and ROI dialed in, and knowing exactly how effective you are and how much impact you're making. And you
also have a lot of templates, like systems and processes and procedures to follow, already done for you.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't have to do a lot of thinking on your own. It'll already be pre-done. You just follow the instructions.
But the experience of the employees, or the experience of the end user, there's a thing that we call spillage, that extroverted thinking has a tendency to think in terms that there is some acceptable loss or acceptable spillage. And that means that if a couple people are like unhappy or upset, but the overall system is working, extroverted thinking thinks that's like, okay, like there's acceptable spillage. So the quality that each individual person is experiencing might be the blind spot. They might not have something that's like beautifully tailored to the individual, because they're more focused on whether or not the system is running smoothly. So that's the advantage and some of the blind spots of a company that works that way, and maybe a team within it. So if you're a person who's really focused on individual human experience, right, the experience that the customer's having, or whether or not every single person is getting like the best service possible, that's one of the things that you might have a little bit of a disjointed relationship with the rest of the team, if the rest of the team is more focused on an extroverted thinking framework.
Yeah. And like a extroverted thinking company would be very likely to have a calling tree. When you call in for customer service, you have to push buttons to get to the proper department. A lot of systems set up to eliminate human error and things of this nature, and to just really simplify it down, streamline it, and create a very scalable business model. That's really what it's after, I think. Let's talk about, let's pivot now and talk about a different judging function, different decision-making function. Let's talk about introverted thinking. So we just talked about extroverted thinking, which is sometimes shorthand written with a capital T, lowercase e. This is introverted thinking, which is written with a capital T, lowercase I. And our nickname for that is accuracy. Now, accuracy is a little different than effectiveness. Effectiveness, again, is about getting the result. And sometimes it doesn't really matter how that result's gotten to, as long as it's a streamlined process, there's not a lot of waste, and the result is gotten to. I think introverted feeling is very much, introverted thinking is very much, I'm thinking of the polarity of that. Introverted thinking is very much interested in making sure that the data set, all the nuance of the information is clean on the way to the result. In fact, sometimes I think introverted thinking can put more emphasis on the clean data than the result itself. If the result is less than good, or maybe it's not perfect, it doesn't really matter because the thinking behind that was really clean. And I think that's where the effort and the focus and attention is put for accuracy. Now, I think a good company is an illustration for this. As far as, and also I think the other thing that introverted thinking brings is almost an egalitarian viewpoint. It brings this idea that it doesn't matter if it's the janitor at our company or the CEO at our company. If somebody's got a good, clean, like well thought out idea or way of doing something, and it's elegant and it's thoughtful, it has clarity and thought behind it, it's valid. And so there's a very egalitarian aspect to this. Whereas extroverted thinking also has a very hierarchical structure to it.
Right. Well, because
top down, yeah.
Introverted thinking is more focused on the information and the data, like you said, being clean. And so it doesn't matter what the source of that is.
Yeah.
As long as the information is good, as long as the data and information is good, then we should be honoring it. And that's why introverted thinking actually tends to have high degrees or identity around integrity. And the process becomes just as important, if not sometimes more important than the result. It wants to make sure that it's honoring the process, wants to make sure that everything is right with the process before it gets to the end of it.
Yeah.
And so the egalitarian nature means that a lot of introverted thinking companies tend to be open source, because if you open it up and allow everybody to have input, then the assumption is that meritocracy will make sure that the cream rises to the top. And that makes it so that all of us can have input no matter who we are, to ensure that we are kind of, what is the word? Not policing, but like ensuring that all of our information is good. And we all have input on whether or not that information is good, because it also wants consensus of good information. So introverted thinking has a tendency to be very open source and very egalitarian.
Whereas extroverted thinking or effectiveness is more constructed. It's a decision point. There's a hierarchical, like, we're going to build this business outward with a lot of not authoritarian, but like, I guess you would call it hierarchy in how it's organized. Introverted thinking companies are a little bit more emergent. So it's a group of maybe coders getting together, loving to create programming languages together, write in programming languages, creating some kind of product or service. And it's like, hey, we're doing this really great work together, and a company almost emerges out of this when they're doing it. And I think a really interesting company for this would be GitHub. Right now, GitHub is basically a software staging platform. You can upload your open source software and you can collaborate on projects with other coders from all around the world. And they have a free version of this and then a premium version of this. And it's in Silicon Valley, in the coding world, in basically online spaces, this is a very popular service. And the company itself emerged out of coding culture. So a lot of the people that were part of the company in the early days, including the CEO, they just love to code. They love to figure out how to do things best and share code with each other and collaborate on projects. And the company almost emerged out of that. And they didn't have a lot of like management structure. They didn't have a lot of top-down managers organizing projects and moving things forward. It was a very lateral organization. Everybody's egalitarian. Well, that caused a little challenge for them. So we're going to talk a little bit of pros and cons when you're dealing with an introverted thinking company, an accuracy company. It's hard to scale when there's not a level of manager and team, because you can't figure out like who's in charge, who's making the final call on something. If everything's egalitarian, it's difficult to know, okay, well, who gets to say what we're going to focus on now? There can be a lot of confusion, and there can be lack of traction or lack of movement because you don't have somebody saying, okay, our team is going this direction, and the whole team moves that direction. So when you have that egalitarian structure, I think it can limit your growth potential.
Well, and
That's one of the cons.
Yeah, I think with extroverted thinking, you oftentimes grow with the end in mind. Like you have an end game specified before you even start moving. So therefore you can do the linear progression to get to that end game. Whereas introverted thinking has a tendency to be a little bit more open to suggestion and not
it's about refinement rather than traction.
Right, it's about, yeah, exactly. It's about refinement. And so the products tend to be very high quality. Introverted thinking oftentimes produces extremely high quality products. But there might be a lot of false starts in the company. Mm-hmm. And it might be something where everybody gets a voice, but maybe not everybody should get a voice. And there's maybe a little bit of confusion and infighting because it's a matter of meritocracy, but then how do you determine who's got the best idea or the best merit? So there might be projects that get started that end up getting the kibosh put on them. And that can be a little discouraging to the morale of the company. And so the great thing is that the precision of the product usually is high. And within the company, there tends to be a little bit of a mess oftentimes. So there's a difference you can already see in extroverted thinking versus introverted thinking, is that extroverted thinking has a great output, but sometimes it's a little oversimplified and it gives acceptable spillage, which might be the customer experience. Whereas introverted thinking has more of a refined, constantly calibrated process where the products are usually very good, but then the office politics are the part that has the company, having trouble creating traction, like Joel mentioned.
Yeah, so with like GitHub, for example, as they start to put in more management structure, a little bit more hierarchy to try to scale and grow, it can cause challenges because no one's used to this yet. So it's causing a little bit of some chaos inside the organization, because as that management structure is coming in, well, is that person put in the management place because they've just been here longer? Are they actually qualified for management? Do they have leadership experience in leading teams? It raises a lot of questions, and there could be a growing pain, I guess, whenever the company tries to transition from that lateral, we all have a similar voice and egalitarian structure, to more hierarchy as you have to grow. Any organization that grows has to put a little bit more hierarchy into it in order to get some traction and to create goals and move toward them. So this can be a growing pain experience for a company like this. So we talked about two companies so far, or two types of companies. One is that extroverted thinking company, effectiveness company. It's going to be very systems based. It's going to be getting a result. It's going to be charting something along a course, metricizing the growth, hierarchy and structure. Then we talked about the introverted thinking, which is accuracy. We've nicknamed accuracy. A little bit more egalitarian, focusing more on the refinement of the product or the service, more so than growing the structure. And now let's talk about, so both of those are thinking, judging functions, extroverted thinking, introverted thinking. Now we're ready to pivot into some of the feeling sides of things, the extroverted feeling and the introverted feeling as far as companies go. Are you ready for that, to move into those?
I am.
You feel complete on the thinker parts?
I feel complete on the thinker parts.
All right, cool.
All right, so let's talk about extroverted feeling. And extroverted feeling is a lot more about how we're all connecting with each other and whether or not we're getting our needs met and everybody feels good about the situation. And so extroverted thinking or extroverted feeling companies have a tendency to be very culture minded. One example of it, even though I don't believe the CEO uses extroverted feeling, the company Zappos has a very extroverted feeling ethos about it.
We've nicknamed this Harmony, by the way.
Right, and like Joel's been doing the assignations of the how it looks when it's in shorthand, and this would be capital F, lowercase e, and we call it, like Joel said, Harmony. And extroverted feeling is, because it's so culture oriented, it tends to create very fun places to work, very popular places to work. It has a sense of, like, if you've ever gone to Zappos and toured their facilities, it feels like a party. In fact, they call themselves the business version of a mullet. Business in the front, party in the back. And there's a convivial attitude, and they do very well. The whole company does very well because everybody really enjoys working there. In fact, I think the last time I was at Zappos, they told me that they get 1,000 applications for every one position that's open. So that's like a crazy amount of popularity. And the challenge can be with Zappos, or not Zappos, but with extroverted feeling, is that because it's so focused on the company culture, sometimes the end game and the ROI and the results, right, like the how it's actually impacting things, they might not necessarily have those numbers. So one example of this is that there was a company that had an insights team, which is a way to teach other companies how to replicate their culture. And insights teams have been popping up in lots of different companies, which is like, do you want a company like ours? Well, we'll give you all the secrets to building, right, a great company culture. And in one of these companies' insights teams, there was a person at the top who was an INFJ. And what we've noticed is that people in positions of hiring have a tendency to hire other people that are very similar to their personality type. And so because he was an INFJ, and INFJs use extroverted feeling, in a team of about 13 people, over half of them were also FJs. They were also people who use extroverted feeling. And there was a couple people who used introverted thinking, and a couple people who used introverted feeling, and 0 people who use extroverted thinking. Now, the reason why this was a challenge is even though it was a great place to work, and they were really good at teaching all of the different things that they were doing to replicate their company culture, because they were teaching other companies that, like, the CEOs would, come into these to these meetings and these sort of camps that teach you how to replicate their company culture. The people who came from extroverted thinking companies always had the question of, well, what's my ROI on this? Like, what are the numbers? How much are you spending to be able to have this company culture be like this? Like, what am I going to have to invest in order to replicate this? And they never had an answer for it because they were all extroverted feelers. And so they didn't really take the time to find the bottom line and figure out the ROI. They just kept saying, well, look at how happy everybody is, and look at how much fun we're having, and look at how great, our productivity is high. We know it's high because we're doing well, but we don't necessarily have the numbers for you to prove that you can do this or replicate the model. And so do what we're doing, but then there was this idea of, is it an actual replicatable model, or what's the whole system, and how do we create a model that another person can grab and then implement to cater or to tailor it to their company? So one of the great things about harmony companies is that they do have a tendency, if they're truly a harmony company, to have good company culture.
Yeah.
But one of the blind spots of it is they don't necessarily always have the numbers. They don't have the ROI. They might not actually be making the numbers they need to, going back to introverted thinking, to be able to scale, right? Because that's one of introverted thinking's challenges too, is being able to scale. So extroverted feeling might also have a blind spot in being able to scale as well.
Yeah, so I think that's a great example of that. And also, I think for extroverted feeling companies, again, we're oversimplifying. There's a lot of nuance here. This is kind of the tone of a company, right? There's probably people that are not extroverted feeling in a company that feels this way. The other thing is that getting along or having everybody be in harmony all the time can make it so that issues don't get brought to attention.
Right.
So things are allowed to fester a little bit longer. That can maybe be a downside to as much fun as everyone's having, and the desire to preserve that fun can actually maybe, it can be difficult to bring key issues to light because now you're ruining the fun, you're ruining the party. You're bringing stuff up now that we have to deal with, and it's creating discord instead of harmony, which is what we want as a company culture ethos. So that could either be maybe a blind spot or something that you can look out for if this is part of your company culture.
Almost like subterranean drama.
Yeah.
Right? Like just this kind of like perpetual subterranean drama that's
Yeah.
kind of like not allowed to actually be complete. Now, again, this is if the company culture is highly swaying this direction and there's nothing to counterbalance it. McDonald's is an example of an uber extroverted thinking company. There's plenty of examples of companies that are extroverted thinking that also have more of a balance to them. So you don't see that level of like push button, like really oversimplified for the lowest common denominator. But McDonald's is like a good example of the extreme of it. And I would say that an extroverted feeling company that's an extreme example of it, that's when you're going to see the drama.
Yeah.
But there are companies that have a harmony bent, but also have more of a balance, so you're not necessarily going to see that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the last judging function, which is introverted feeling. So we just talked about extroverted feeling. This is introverted feeling. Sometimes it's written in shorthand with a capital F and a lowercase I. We've nicknamed you this authenticity. It's all about inner resonance with the core values of a person. So this is a function that I use, obviously, my personality type. And it's all about what the inner alignment is, the core values, what's the right thing to do, what is in alignment with my core inner sense of what I want to do. And companies that do this, companies that show up like this, typically want to honor the individual expression and provide tools and services for people to showcase themselves, to be able to express themselves in a way. I think that a good company, as an example of this, is the earlier version of Apple when Steve Jobs was at the helm. I think Apple Computer, or Apple, I guess they dropped the computer part at one point, is a good example of how introverted feeling can show up. In that, when Steve Jobs created, I think it was the first MacBook, he had his engineers that worked on it sign their names on the inside of it, and then it was actually manufactured that way with their names, their signatures on the inside of this, and he had people working on the inside of these, so like their signature, the personal expression or input to this was put directly into the machine itself. Even if no one saw it, they knew that their mark was on this. It was something that they got to express themselves by creating at Apple. And then you can see that Steve Jobs and the ethos of Apple was creating products and computers basically for people to utilize to express themselves artistically, creatively. It was very much focused on the creative expression, giving tools and all of the different software they developed for you to be able to creatively express yourself. So you can see a very introverted feeling type company, right?
Right. Well, and also, I mean, like we have different fonts probably because Steve Jobs was super into calligraphy when he went to college.
Well, we know that's true, yeah.
Yeah. So there's an artistic expression woven through all of Apple that rooted itself in this idea of we want to make sure that the individual is able to utilize these products. And you can see that it's kind of got that sort of really focused on the end user's experience, because Apple products, in my opinion, are very easy to navigate. With the exception of certain elements of them. I personally loathe iTunes. I'm not sure how you feel about iTunes, but you can tell that there are certain elements that got super hyper focused on as being really important to have perfect and right, and other elements that you can tell were sort of like, well, done is good enough. Yeah. Or at least that's my read on Apple products. And so, as with all people who use introverted feeling, there is the blind spot of companies like this is that there are some things that get hyper focused on. They're super duper super important, and a lot of time and energy goes into perfecting those things because the people who are leading those that use introverted feeling think that those are the things that really should be highlighted and focused on. And then there are other elements that kind of get ignored because there's not like a special connection that the individual has, or the team lead or the person who's focused on it. There's not a special connection they have with that element of the project. Yeah. And so one of the blind spots is that there are certain elements that are like blow your socks off amazing, and other elements that are kind of like meh and confusing, and maybe the end user doesn't have a good experience with those. And they also have a tendency to be very, there is a visionary component to people who are in and especially run introverted feeling style companies.
Yeah, Apple's lost its soul a little bit since Steve Jobs died. Like, not soul, right. It has some of it, but it definitely lost some of its, there's something missing now.
So in an introverted feeling company, there's that visionary component where the entire company sort of swells as long as the visionary is at the helm. Yeah. But then when the visionary goes away for some reason, they either die or maybe they just move on, the rest of the company sort of like, it loses its buoyancy. So unlike extroverted thinking that ensures that it creates a replicable model, so it's not dependent upon a single individual, like it doesn't matter whether or not Ray Kroc is alive or dead, McDonald's keeps going, right? Yeah. But the companies that are more introverted feeling oriented, when they lose the visionary at the helm, there's no replicable model necessarily to rest into. So there's a little bit of sort of like oh, well, now what do we do? And so that's one of the blind spots that introverted feeling models have, is that there's not necessarily a succession plan, right? There's not necessarily a new visionary, and they maybe struggle for a little while to find a new visionary at the helm.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a little about ways for people to type. So if you're watching, how do you apply this to where you work, your work life? How do you apply this to your career? And how do you basically determine what culture your company is using? Again, we're grossly oversimplifying, but let's talk about that a little bit.
So you might have already identified what your team's preferred judging style is. If you could type or profile the team as sort of as a gestalt, you probably already have identified some of the markers of that team. Do you have like a visionary at the helm? Do you have somebody who's trying to create replicable systems all the time? Do you have somebody who's focused on morale, or do you have more of a egalitarian sort of environment where everybody is expected to perform in a meritocracy way? And once you diagnose that, if you fit well with your team, it probably is because you really honor that. Even if it's not your judging style, you might really honor that, and you might be the thing that covers their blind spot. You might be the element that they need in order to balance it all out, and you have a very good symbiotic relationship. But if there is some struggle, sometimes it's because you're the odd man out, and you're noticing that your team or even the company is swaying way too far one of these sides. And so one of the things that we've done when we've gone into companies and profiled entire teams is, first of all, we've looked for those blind spots. Is there a single judging process that's sort of overwhelming the entire team and making it so that the blind spots aren't even addressed at all, and nobody knows what the challenges are because it's all living in a dark space and there's no light shone on it?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that you can do is kind of sort of passively profile your team and go, is it the same judging style I'm seeing over and over and over again here? Or is there some element of it where I actually see a balance here, and maybe the challenges that I'm experiencing have nothing to do with type, which sometimes is the case. And one thing that we've done is, once we've profiled teams, is we have an image of the CAR model, which is the cognitive function breakdown for each personality type, and what is in the driver process, the co-pilot process, the 10-year-old and the 3-year-old process. And there's a printout sheet. And we've given them their CAR model, and what we've noticed is they almost invariably put it up on their cubicle wall. And in those teams, what's nice is that they've already done all of this. They've all been profiled. We've done some team exercises. And so when they walk over to another person's cubicle, they can just look at their CAR model and go, oh, well, mine's this way and yours is this way. And that's very interesting. And it's a conversation starter, and they can kind of try to meet each other halfway. But even if your entire team hasn't been profiled and you aren't in a position to do that yourself because of many reasons, what you can do is find your CAR model for your personality type. You can find that at personalityhacker.com, putting in your personality type and finding the CAR model. And then you can put it up on your cubicle wall and then have it be a conversation starter for other people. So it's a simple action step that you can take. So when other people go, oh, what's this? You can explain how your judging process works and pique their interest, and maybe get a dialogue going with the entire team to try to determine what the personality types are of the entire team. But just being able to sort of observe the feel of the team will help you meet other people halfway if you at least know what their judging process or the judging process of the feel of the team is. You come from a place of information and being able to define the situation as opposed to just being confused about what's going on.
Yeah, it's mostly in life and at work too, when you're in your career, most of the time people are not being jerks to each other. I mean, there are people that are jerks in the world. Most of us are just wired differently. Like, we're just engaging the world, we're making decisions differently, we're seeing the world differently, and it's so obvious to us because it's how our experience, like we overvalue our own experience, right? It's so obvious to us that this is how the world, we should see it, and these are the decisions we should make. And it's obvious to everybody that way, quote unquote, right? We all have this obvious, this is how things work. And it's just simply not the case. Like, no one has the same wiring. Like, all of us, obviously there's 7 billion people on the planet, and we're only talking about 16 types to try to fit people down to 16 types here in the Myers-Briggs system. And then there's the Enneagram and other different typology systems, right? We're just talking about taking 7 billion people and trying to get a pattern of how people are wired. But there's so much nuance here. This is a great framework for us in our business culture and our business lives to see, oh, you're not being a jerk to me. You're not being obtuse on purpose. You're not purposely not seeing what I'm seeing. Your mind is just wired differently. You're making decisions differently from me. Duh, no wonder. No wonder we're having conflict. No wonder you're seeing it this way. And even when I say that, you're probably nodding going, yeah, I get that, on a basic level, but do we really get that? I mean, we teach this stuff for a living. This is what we do in our lives. And even us will like, why are you seeing it this way? It's like, oh, that's right, you're wired that way. It's even if you know it, it's something you forget. So in your work life, if you can get a sense of how you're wired, how the people in your work life are wired, and how the company culture is kind of thinking about things, how the decisions are made, the type of company culture that's there, it gives you a lot of power. Just that alone, just having the framework without any narrative to it of like what you should do with it, just understanding that about yourself and the people you work with is immensely powerful. So we can't recommend, getting that car model for yourself and figuring out, like how you're interplaying with the rest of the team that you work with at your job. Now, we're going to do a webinar. I mentioned this at the beginning of this video. I'll mention it again here. We're going to do a webinar on the 6th of December at 7:30, where we're going to basically talk about anytime you have one of those 4-letter codes, ENFP, INTJ, ESTJ, ESFJ, whatever it is, how to take that and figure out the cognitive function stack or the mental wiring of a person that is of that type. So we're going to talk about the 4 code, which acts like a decoder ring. And you can then determine the learning process or the perceiving process someone's using, cognitive function, technical term, or their technical cognitive function of their judging function or decision-making function. We're going to teach you how to do that on this webinar. We're also going to talk about our profiler training certification course we're going to open up in a few days. So we'll have more information about that. We'd love to have you join us live on that webinar where we talk more about this. You can ask your questions. You can get more information about the profiler training course. We're going to see you there, so make sure you come. There's a link below this video. I'm pretty sure it's below or above or somewhere around this video. Click on that link, register. We'd love to have you join us for that. You feel complete about all the business stuff so far?
I think so.
All
yeah.
Right. We're going to do another video next. Oh, you have something you want to say, I can tell.
No,
oh, that
I
was
don't.
one of those, I want to say something.
I know, I usually
movements.
I make that motion when I have something to say, but I was just going to say we'll see you
All right,
at
cool.
that webinar.
See you at the webinar, and we're going to do one more video. The next video we're going to go into is going to be around using this in your family dynamics. How can you type not just your workplace, but the family you're involved with? And we're going to talk about some deeper levels of the cognitive functions when we go into the next video. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. We'll see you on that next.